Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. This episode is sponsored by Butcher Box. Today we have Chase Ingraham and CrossFit Games athlete Tim Paulson here to discuss if Wodapalooza had too many scored tests for a 2-day competition or if it was necessary for a balanced test. Now, we know this past year, elite individuals had 9 scored events, elite teams had 8. But for the offseason, we've seen several competitions have somewhat of a similar format, but across several days rather than 2. Dubai had 8 events. Rogue even had 10 over the course of 4 days. So, Chase, I'm curious if you think that it changes the competition when athletes have this type of volume in just 2 days.
The thing you got to look at is not just the number of events, but the total time like those took place. Is because when you have a part A, part B, they put in multiple scores. And I know why they do it, right? It's only 2 days of competition, and you want to try to get in more scores to really balance out how points are allocated. And I understand that. I think the issue is that a lot of those shorter events were like really, really intense. And when you think about intensity really being one of those like key components of you'd feel later, right? And Tim can attest to this, is like a 20 plus minute event, though it sounds like a lot of volume and really long, doesn't have as dramatic of effect on your body as say Fran or Elizabeth or Diane, which are all sub 3-minute events. And I think there was maybe 4 or 5 tests that had that level of intensity, which I think added to kind of the beat upness of some of the individuals that went through.
Tim, you decided only to go team this year. What was some of the feedback that you got from, I mean, we know several elite athletes that chose to do both team and individual. How were they feeling once they got to your portion of the weekend?
Not great. Yeah, like Ricky was on my team, and he was beat up. I mean, his legs especially were feeling it. And I think I guess just kind of, so everybody was feeling that way though. A lot of people were really sore. The individual piece definitely took its toll. And I think one thing that they might have to consider in the future is like, there's usually a lot of parallels in CrossFit between the individual and the team events. So you'll see similar themes, things like that. But when you're trying to encourage people to do both of these competitions, and then they basically do the same events in the same order 2 times and then another 2 times, but you just split the work among 3 people, like, so those guys ended up doing a ton of muscle up. They ended up repeating these same movements throughout the entire weekend. So when there's a lot of carryover like that, I understand why from a programming standpoint you would do that, like from like a kind of storytelling from individuals to teams. But when you've got a lot of people that are doing both, I think it can get pretty aggressive on the overall volume of certain movements, especially over the course of the weekend. So, I mean, that might be something to consider moving forward, especially if they want to really entice people to do both. I was very thankful I just did team, actually. So it was a good year for it.
Well, and obviously, if we look at something like the CrossFit Games, I mean, yourself and other people who are competing at the games, they kind of prepared themselves for that type of volume. When we're looking at an off-season competition, are you and other athletes adding in this much volume to prepare for a weekend like we saw at Wodapalooza?
So, I mean, I think for like, I'll go back to like, for me, an example, like Rogue was my big off-season individual competition. And, we picked up the training a little bit for that, for sure. Like, obviously, intensity wise, mostly because you're kind of planning for what you've seen historically. So, like, and a lot of the athlete feedback from Rogue this year was like, that was a lot. Like, I was not ready for that level. Like just like that level of volume, intensity, that duration, like there was a lot packed into that weekend. So I think, it's kind of what the expectations are historically, as far as like how to prepare for it exactly. But I mean, nobody preps for these off-season events like you would prep for the games. I think, there are very few who might kind of go that route. For the most part, you're looking for a data point in the off-season. So, you're trying to keep your focus big picture. So, I mean, I would say a lot of the guys for Wodapalooza, especially going into the holidays, there was a joke going around among me and a few of my buddies that if you show up for Wodapalooza fit and ready, you're a nerd.
Nerd alert.
You should be enjoying yourself a little bit. But yeah, so I mean, I think everyone gets prepared. It's a competition. You want to put your best foot forward. But I think, yeah, especially the guys that did both probably maybe weren't quite ready for that, the whole scope of that weekend.
Do either of you think that in order for a competition to give like the most balanced test, that between 8 and 10 events is necessary to achieve that?
Meal prepping is a huge part of my routine and lifestyle, but one of the biggest headaches for me is going to the grocery store and trying to find high quality meat that I can trust. That's why I recently turned to Butcher Box. There's a ton of different options when it comes to deciding what's in the box, from 100% grass-fed beef to free-range organic chicken, pork-raised crate-free, and even wild-caught seafood. They make it convenient to get all that protein in without the headache of the supermarket. For me, I went with the customized box so I could pick exactly what I like to eat, or more in my case, what I know how to cook. But if you're feeling like getting more comfortable in the kitchen, they have recipe inspos to bring your very basic cooking skills, like myself, to chef-level brilliance. Tacos are a staple for me, and Butcher Box helps keep them fresh and high quality no matter which box I choose. Use code CHALKUP to get a discount on your box so you can hurry up and get cooking. Now, back to the episode.
It's not like kind of like we started off the beginning of the conversation. It's not about the number of events. It's like you can create a balanced test in 4. It's much more difficult to do, but more events doesn't mean a better test. Less events doesn't mean a worse test, but it's how these things are put together is a huge component of this. And one of the things programmers need to look at, and I'm not just talking about Wodapalooza or even Rogue itself, is that we need to make sure is that there is a balance among that, not just to create like the most balanced test, but how often are we breaking parallel with intensity? There was a lot of that at Wodapalooza. How often are we pulling? You know, Tim was just talking about that. There was a lot of pulling in individual. There was also a lot of pulling, similar pulling in team. And those are the things you want to look at, because Wodapalooza said exclusively, like, we are not trying to find the fittest person in the world this weekend. We are trying to have the most fun. It is a fitness festival. It is a celebration of fitness, which is why everybody comes in not fully prepared for a monster test of fitness. So I think balancing the programming along with what their promotion is one of those key things, I think, to maybe pay a bit more attention to, especially when you're giving people the option to do indy and team.
Tim, you were also agreeing, and I mean, we know that you got into the games because of the last chance qualifier, which did only have 4 tests. So the question of whether 4 tests is enough, you think it is?
I mean, not necessarily 4, but I mean, I think 6 tests over 3 days, it can be very adequate. I mean, if I look at like a week of programming for my affiliate, I'll program 6 days of workouts. We have 1 day off. And over the course of a week, there's 6, balanced tests. We're trying to hit different movement patterns, different loading, all these different things. And you could do the same thing with a competition, and people could have a lot of fun. You could have some high intensity. You could have some longer stuff. So I don't think you need to go much more than 6. The double scored events are helpful. Like, I think the one that I point to this year that I think was actually, I really liked from just a pure programming perspective, was the lift and then the handstand, because you get these polar opposites that kind of mesh together. So you end up hopefully with, someone who is really strong and really skilled, they might excel, but
Everybody's trying to call me right now. I don't know why.
You're not just
But,
here, bro.
I know. But I'm on the road. I don't have my laptop. But, for most people, like, you're going to see a dichotomy. You're going to see good here, bad here. And I think that's a cool way to do a balanced test, because then if you are very well-rounded, you can excel. That being said, I don't really know how they did the points. The leaderboard looked super weird. So if either of you can enlighten me, that would be great. But, I think having one of them can be a good thing as long as it's done intelligently. But, like, especially, look at the team events. So the team cut to 10 for the finale, and there was 2 scored events. So, and the way the points disperse, like, you could have 100+ point swing in the final event and basically kind of negate what had happened the rest of the weekend. Like, you could have theoretically gone from like 10th to 3rd if you did really well in the last 2 events, negating your last, 5 or 6 scored events. So I don't love when that happens, because again, it puts an unnecessary emphasis on the latter part of the weekend when you don't really want that, because you're artificially weighting those 2 events more than anything else.
So what if we're looking at Wodapalooza as what they kind of advertise themselves as. They are this fitness party. They want spectators. They want people who maybe have never been a fan of CrossFit to come and watch. I think that's a huge reason why they have Thursday as the free day. If they were to program less events, do you think it would be driving away from that goal of like providing more from a fan perspective?
Yeah, 100%. I think that having less events gives athletes more time to be present, and that's part of the fun for Wodapalooza, both for spectators and for athletes, is to actually be able to catch up with people, see sponsors, go spend time with the community. And I was able to do a lot more of that this year, just doing team, having an additional day and some downtime between team events. So 100% yes, in my opinion.
Chase is somebody, who covers many of these events. What is your thought?
Well, I think one thing to give them a pass on is this is the first time they've ever tried this two-day format, which really is a cool opportunity for the athletes and the fans alike, because they can see them compete on individual, they can see them compete on teams. And I think it's just one of those growing pains to figure out, hey, what is the best solution going forward? Was it, okay, we programmed this many events and we filled up the days, like the individuals did not get any breaks at all, and the teams, like there were some times where the team men were finishing an event and the women were starting an event on a different competition floor. And that probably to me is just a product of them wanting to give fans more to see. And this to me is a less is more deal, because it's okay to have some big breaks during the weekend between events for the individual elites or the elite teams. Why? Because just like Tim says, it allows them to take a break. So it's fun for the athletes, number one. And it allows other divisions to get some spotlight during the weekend. If there's a 2-hour break on Elite Thursday, go watch the adaptive division starting on Flagler, starting at 2:00 in the afternoon, or watch the gauntlet going down with your buddies or, some fans in there. So I think a less is more approach it might be one of those things we figured out after the trial that we had at Wodapalooza this year. I don't fault them at all for wanting to give athletes more opportunities to do more things. I don't fault their idea of giving the fans to watch more stuff. That's why they packed these days full of events and competition. I think after seeing it is like, you don't really need to do that. It can keep it fun for everybody. And like Tim said, more opportunities to look at more things other than just the individual elite competition.
Tim, what would you say your bottom line is?
My bottom line, Wodapalooza is awesome. I've been there for like 8 years now. I love it. I think they've done a great job every year, and the event's only gotten bigger. So I'm sure they're going to get bigger and better from this as well. And they'll kind of, figure out what works best and maybe find a bigger venue.
Chase, what's your bottom line?
I tailed it off right there. A less is more approach. They want to always go big, and they always do go big, and they do it in the best ways, which is why it is so fun. It is why everyone travels all over the world to come celebrate with them. But I think it's okay to take a little step back, a less is more approach to make it even that much better.
Awesome. Well, Chase and Tim, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.